Sincere thanks to everyone for coming. My name is Irvin Studin. I'm chair of the Worldwide Commission to Educate All Kids Post-Pandemic. I've had the honor of doing that for the last 3 years. We'll get to that in a second. I'm also president, co-founder of the Institute for 21st Century Questions, which is hosting this event, and founded the commission. Sincere thanks to everyone for coming across Canada and around the world. Really, we're here from all continents, and we got Uganda here easier than Montreal, and in some cases easier than Richmond Hill, but it's a big achievement, so I thank you for coming. And I'll get to our principal proceedings in a second, but second thanks go to my tremendous team at the Institute for 21st Century Questions, who really worked overtime and still continues to work behind the scenes on putting together this very big and historical event. Here I'm talking about Liz Galvin, Faraz Hornavar, Leah Antonova, Leslie McMillan, Ala Studin, and colleagues. And the co-founder of the Institute for 21st Century Questions is Sam Sasan-Shomanesh. He's a great Canadian based in The Hague, and he sends his regards. I want to thank Elder Wabagoon for graciously blessing and opening our event. She does it always with such style and energy is apropos today, so thank you, Elder Wabagoon, for being here. March of 2020. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the world changed, and it changed in ways that were very paradoxical. That is, we had a pandemic. Canada is not habituated to emergencies at all. You're coming to one of the most stable countries in the world that has not known land warfare for a century and a half. And Toronto in particular, that seems to escape all political and natural disasters. But in March of 2020, evidently, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the world. And the biggest action of them all, in my humble submission, was the closure of the school systems across all of Canada and most of the world. These were sustained closures without interruption for months on end. Uganda will tell you soon that it was for 2 years straight, and in our cases, serially opening and closing. Very well. But we did not understand what was happening on the ground when we closed the biggest system in the country. I was already writing in the newspapers about the need for not only them to be open, but for us to focus more on excellence coming out of the pandemic than on safety, because of the post-pandemic world that would be that much more difficult, so we have to up the preparation level. Martha Fulford, who's here, was probably one of the only other people in the country who was actively publicly intervening very counterintuitively on that front. We'll hear from Martha today. But it was only around September of 2020 that I began to scratch at what was really happening at our feet, colleagues. I went to a mall in the suburbs of Toronto, one of the wealthiest suburbs, and I asked the lonely playground attendant within the mall, I said, it's the first week of school, second week of school, September, you must be miserable. No one's coming, right? They closed the businesses and the kids are at school. He said, business is booming. We've never had it so good. I said, what do you mean businesses are booming? The kids are in school. He said, kids are here all day, every day. I said, they're not in school? They're not in school. What do you mean they're not in school? First question. I was in Ottawa the next month. It's the capital of Canada, 4.5 hours by car. Driving home, I'm listening to radio on the Quebec side of the border in French. On nous dit qu'il y a une certaine proportion de la population qui n'a aucun accès à l'Internet. So, when you go online, we're told on the radio that some of the kids aren't getting schooling because they simply have no internet access. And let's push that a little bit further. They don't actually have a device. And if they have a device, it doesn't actually work very well. And maybe it becomes more expensive over time to sustain the internet access than the device as the closures become more sustained. Second eureka moment, what is going on? So I do a calculation. I call my colleague at the Institute for 21st Century, Faraz Hornavar. I said, Faraz, let's find out what proportion of the population in Canada has no access to the internet when you close the schools. Because remember, we were telling ourselves on Twitter and Facebook that we were pivoting to online learning. That was the mantra. That's what the decision makers understood in good faith. And the number was, I thought 6%, could be as low as 1%, maybe 2%. But Ontario controls 40% of the national student body. That's 2 million on 5 million students across Canada, and had the longest closures Ontario did in all of North America. Toronto District School Board is the biggest school board in all of North America. Let's start putting the numbers together. Third eureka moment. My wife came up to me and said, after I reported this, she said, yeah, I know some parents in the well-to-do suburbs of Toronto who have just decided their kids are going to take a year off. We're going to take a year off of school, a gap year in grade 3. Sounds good online. Let's go find ourselves. But that self-exploration endures when the schools close. And the tides shift. The school stays closed, the child grows, and when it reopens putatively in half-baked form, low energy, as we'll discuss soon, the child has nowhere to return. No one knows that the child has taken a gap year. No one is there to receive the child a year or two behind. And no one is there certainly with a tailored choreography for the child to catch up. Now multiply this against very large populations. Countries that we'll hear from in a second. So the problem in the understanding shifted. And by November, December, we were talking about standing up the Worldwide Commission to Educate All Kids post-pandemic. Because by then I'd called my colleague Nancy Rousseau in Arkansas. I said, are you seeing this in Arkansas? She said, are we ever? By the way, I love Arkansas, Little Rock, a gem. I called my colleague Bob Pianta, to whom I was introduced through other colleagues. He was then Dean of Education at the University of Virginia. Powerfully articulated the very same dynamics and then some. I called colleagues in India. I said, when you close the schools in India, not only do you have non-internet access, no internet access, we're talking in some cases in 80–90% proportions, but the physical school disappears over time. Second law of thermodynamics, you close the system, it disappears physically. The kids go back to the village, the girl gets married in her early teens, and the boy goes to labor, into the labor force, en masse, at Indian scale. We found Fiona in Uganda, who's here today. I don't know whether you know how difficult it is to get a top Ugandan here to Toronto on the current visa regulation, but we got Fiona. It's a huge honor to have Fiona because she's been with us on the commission from day one, and she'll tell you that Uganda closed the schools for 2 years straight. And what happened, not to the physical school, but to the personnel, to the people, to the teachers. They don't sit in a box as we imagine online. They either develop or disintegrate. Thermodynamics. So we stood up formally in early January 2021, the Worldwide Commission to Educate All Kids post-pandemic, at scale across all of Canada. People joined very fast. I'm very grateful for all the members. And we grew it to over 60 countries now and growing. And we have a very synoptic picture on what, in my view, is the biggest catastrophe of the pandemic period, both in numbers and then in consequences. Because the consequences bleed out into every system of state and society going forward. So it's not the education of cute kids as we imagine them in 2019 Toronto going to school, the lunchbox, and the most stable system in the world, Canadian school system. It is the disintegration of said system, foretelling very, very difficult futures, some of which, by the way, if you now scratch and begin to reconceptualize the problem we see at our feet across the Greater Toronto Area. Rates of youth antisocial behavior, violence, right? Rebellion, some of which Philip Savas and Kirby Mitchell began to foretell or to explain in the documentary. So before I go into the commission, I just want to say that it was commended to us by a colleague who just retired to the National Film Board. He said, "You got to put it in images." I said, "Great idea. We got very short time to put this commission, this global summit together. We got to put a documentary together. Who can do it?" He put a call out, and he came back to me. He said, "Irvin, I got this excellent candidate, Michelle Melez, to do it." I said, "I'm going to speak to Michelle, but there's a problem. Michelle's from the beaches, and someone from the beaches can't put together a documentary on this topic. They don't feel it the way we do in, let's say, Richmond Hill." But Michelle did a stunning job, and she got it right away, and she went off to the races, and she made me cry because she told it as it is. And she spoke with Kirby, who was one of the original members of the commission, from whom you'll hear in a moment. She spoke with Philip, she spoke with Nancy, Bob, Steve, Liz Galvin, whom we'll introduce shortly. So I thank Michelle. Just before we go to formal proceedings, I explain a little bit more about our time together, the commission and the launch of Project Youth Energy. I want to really salute Michelle because this documentary will be seen around the world, and I hope you will share it because it's translatable to every country around the world. The experience that we imagined would have been true on other continents that were less advanced, less developed, that we imagined ourselves in Canada, started here at our feet. So thank you, Michelle. So the documentary is called When Schools Close. It is my fervent mission, chairing the commission, that schools never close again. It's not an ideological position, it's purely practical. You close the schools and disaster awaits for the children the moment the schools close and for the society the day after. It is also a moral position, and I'm not very moralistic in my work, but it's a moral position as a father, as an adult, that we have a moral duty to prepare our kids for tomorrow. And the moral duty is failed if they're not prepared for tomorrow. It's the basic equation. So when you close the schools, you have to say, well, what kind of world awaits when the schools open? And are the kids ready? And what critical path is required in order for us to have them ready? What we're finding now, when we launch something called Project Youth Energy, is that there's insufficient energy in the system, in physics terms, for them to be prepared tomorrow. We collapse the systems. We collapse many systems, the school system largest amongst them. Then we reopen them half-baked, under-constituted, with insufficient energy, so that the runway after childhood is insufficiently long for them to be prepared. And I assure you, colleagues, it's not cute for a child to be underprepared for tomorrow, whatever illusions we've told ourselves over the last few years. So the goal of the commission, as we started it, was several-fold. First, to bring acute awareness to the problem that obtains in school closures around the world so that it's never repeated again. Two, to find and reintegrate into schooling all of the third bucket kids who were ousted from schooling during the pandemic, and I'll return to the third bucket in a second. And third, for the rest of the system to reconstitute it and them with maximal energy so that we prepare our kids for what post-pandemic and post any disaster is a more difficult tomorrow. It's a logical and strategic calculation. We have no brief on what happens within the schools in terms of curriculum. That's not our thing because we're working across 60 countries. All that we say is energy, 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 excellence, excellence, excellence. We recognize that across jurisdictions, even across Canada, but certainly across continents, There will be different predilections and periods for curriculum. But we're not into marginal manipulation of curriculum. It is energy, 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 so that we have ramp-up room. What's a third bucket kid? Well, it's an awkward vernacular that we divined early in the life of the Commission to explain what to Uganda, to India, to Argentina, to Sri Lanka, these are prominent members of the Commission, was plain and obvious, but could not be communicated to our very Canadian mind. That is, that a child is out of school when the school closes. What do you mean out of school? Irvin, you must be criticizing the curriculum. You must not like it. Very well, I may or may not like it, but that's not what I'm talking about. The child is out of school. Must be homeschooled. No, not homeschooled. Must be pod schooled. No. Must be taking a year off. Maybe on and off online. I said, out of school. Dickensian. So we said, the only way we can get it through our very advanced country mentality, where we're not used to that nature or measure of catastrophe, is to come up with a different construct, different words. So we came up with third bucket kids. First bucket, physical school. Second bucket, virtual school. Third bucket, no school at all. So when you close the schools, a certain contingent goes online, the majority, and some immediately defect to the third bucket. No access to internet, no access to a device. But then let's build on that. You're in a home for a sustained period where there's physical or verbal or sexual abuse. You're out sooner rather than later. You're in a school, you're in a home where you're suffering for physical or mental disabilities, or ones that are acquired over time during the pandemic. You're out. You don't master English or French in Canada, the languages of instruction. You're out. Or, as we did here in Ontario, we closed the schools in April of 2021, in my humble view, unforgivably, by saying that the schools are closed indefinitely. Indefinitely to a teenage mind means that's it. This is en permanence. This is our condition. There is no return proposition. And they're out. School doesn't exist, it has no meaning, and the exit costs, as our colleagues will attest to momentarily, are negligible. Off the Zoom call, into the ether, no one's looking for you. No one even knows that you're gone. At the very moment when your adolescent narcissism requires that they know that you're gone. I'm leaving, somebody come find me. Remember, if you or I tried to drop out of a physical school, well, I was in high school only 5 years ago, but when I tried to drop out of high school, I would say, I'm dropping out. Who wants to keep me in? And then my non-existent girlfriend would come and stop me. The teacher would stop me. The walls would stop me. My friends would stop me. And then I would say, I was only kidding. I just wanted to check. But if I'm out, then someone will come find me. The teachers will know, some of the attendance officers will find, but online, that all disappears. There are no barriers to exit. And then when we reopen the schools, you imagine reopening to normalcy. The 15-year-old is 17 years old. And you're going to try to get a 17-year-old back to a 15-year-old classroom after what he or she has been through over that period. So this is third bucket kids. Remember, it's one of the two major consequences of the pandemic. It is the most pathological one because the numbers are huge, and these are kids with no education at all who were in regular school, regular kids prior to that. Plus everyone else who was in school, the majority highly undereducated formally, under-socialized, unless we bring to bear that compensating energy, which is our project here today. So with those opening remarks, I want to thank you again for coming. Our time here is practical. Please mingle, please spread the word so this never happens again, and we'll understand what's happened and what's to be done as we move through the day and launch Project Youth Energy. I'll just give a quick plug because tomorrow is about that formal one. We have Liz Galvin, who's Director of Project Youth Energy, was in the documentary. the project is to find, starting with a number of 500 youth across Ontario, to bring them back to education and get them skilled up for first employment, and hopefully scale that across the country and give a message to the rest of the world that they ought to be doing the same. So with that, I'll ask the first panel to gather here, and we'll take just a 2-minute intermission as they gather. Thank you.